A broke nurse helped a man in rags, not knowing he was a disguised millionaire who would show up to propose months later. Rain hammered the roof of Westbridge General Hospital with an unrelenting force, as if testing the limits of the old building. It was close to midnight, and the emergency room bristled with commotion. Harried nurses shuffling gurneys, doctors snapping orders, and frantic relatives shouting to be heard above the downpour. Through sliding glass doors, the storm raged. Lightning cast harsh silhouettes against the waiting area. Emma Wilson, a 25-year-old nurse nearing the tail end of a grueling double shift, felt every muscle in her body protest. She'd been on her feet for nearly 16 hours, tending to everything from broken bones to high fevers. Despite her exhaustion, she pushed aside her fatigue to greet the next wave of new arrivals. Her ponytail drooped, hair plastered to her forehead in the muggy heat that clashed with the hospital's icy air conditioning. Outside, an ambulance pulled up, its red lights reflecting off deep puddles as paramedics wheeled in more patients. Emma darted from bed to bed, checking 4 lines, measuring blood pressure, and distributing reassuring smiles where she could. "Hey, Emma," shouted Dr. Sanders, a middle-aged physician with worry etched across his face. "We've had a potential cardiac case by the entrance. Go see what's up." She glanced across the crowded corridor. A man huddled by the wall, soaked through by the rain, wearing ragged clothes and clutching his chest. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with hair plastered flat and rivulets of water streaming off his sleeves. One of Emma's fellow nurses, Janelle, shot him a withering look. "Another homeless guy," Janelle muttered under her breath, rolling her eyes. "Probably just wants a warm bed on a stormy night." Emma stiffened at the remark. "He's a patient," she said firmly. "I'll handle this." Without waiting for a response, she hurried over. Up close, the man's lips were tinged blue, his eyes dilated with pain. Emma knelt beside him, her scrubs soaking at the knees from the pooling water on the floor. Her trained eye quickly assessed his symptoms: irregular breathing, clammy skin, and what appeared to be signs of shock. 8 years of emergency medicine experience told her this wasn't just someone seeking shelter. "Sir, can you tell me your name? Can you rate your chest pain on a scale of 1 to 10? Emma's voice was calm but authoritative, the same tone she used with all patients regardless of their appearance. He tried to speak, but all that emerged was a ragged groan. Emma carefully checked his pulse, rapid and thready, while simultaneously calling over her shoulder, "I need a gurney here. Possible acute coronary syndrome." Dr. Sanders and Janelle exchanged skeptical glances, but Emma's clinical precision left no room for argument. She swiftly attached a portable pulse oximeter to his finger, noting the dangerously low oxygen saturation. "Let's get you inside," she said, maintaining eye contact with him as orderlies finally brought a wheelchair. Every part of her ached from overwork, yet adrenaline propelled her onward as she efficiently directed his transfer. "Start him on oxygen for liters per minute. I want a 12-lead EKG and cardiac enzyme stat." She navigated him through the throngs of sick and injured, found a free exam bay, and drew the curtains closed. Lightning flashed through a high window, illuminating the man's pale features. Emma grabbed a fresh towel, pressing it against his soaked hair and shoulders while simultaneously checking the monitor readings. "My name is Emma Wilson," she said softly, her professional demeanor momentarily softening. "I'm a nurse here, and I want to make sure you get the care you need." She emphasized the word need, not deserve or qualify for, because in her mind, medical care was never about worthiness. The man shivered, exhaling a tremulous breath. "Thank you," he managed, voice raw. At that moment, a dismissive voice cut through the curtain. "Emma, leave him. We're too busy for freeloaders tonight," came a colleague's scornful remark from somewhere in the corridor. Her cheeks burned with indignation, but her hands remained steady as she attached ECG leads to his chest. She'd seen too many patients turn away or overlooked because they didn't fit a convenient mold. The elderly dismissed as just confused, the poor labeled as drug-seeking, the homeless treated as invisible. 8 years in emergency medicine had hardened her resolve rather than her heart. "It's all right," she reassured the man, adjusting the oxygen flow. We'll figure out what's causing this. Your symptoms are real, and they matter to me. Emma slipped the stethoscope into place over his chest. She heard rapid, uneven heartbeats, but no distinctive murmurs or crackles that would indicate immediate heart failure. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, checking for other symptoms while her mind cataloged possibilities. Anxiety attack, hypothermia, dehydration, or something more serious. As she gently took his hand to measure his pulse again, something caught her attention. His skin was smooth, unusually so. Nothing like the rough, calloused hand she associated with people who'd been surviving on the streets for years. His nails were clean and evenly trimmed beneath the surface grime. A subtle dissonance crept through her mind. This doesn't make sense, she thought, noticing the contradiction between his appearance and these small details. Still, he was clearly in distress, and that took precedence over her curiosity. Let's get you warm and stabilized, she said, focusing on her immediate responsibilities. She hung in 4-bag and inserted the needle with expert care, noting how he barely flinched. Another small incongruity. Most of her long-term homeless patients had difficult veins from dehydration or substance use. In the background, thunder rumbled like distant drums, as though the very night crackled with anticipation of something extraordinary about to unfold. Emma didn't get a chance to pause and reflect on the man's oddities. The ER was operating at its limits, and she had too many tasks to juggle. Between checking on a child with a high fever and an elderly woman with pneumonia, she managed to slip back into his cubicle every few minutes, measuring his vitals, administering fluids, and gently coaxing him to speak about his symptoms. How long have you been experiencing chest pain? She asked during one visit, adjusting his warming blanket. Started this afternoon, he replied, his diction surprisingly precise despite his weakened state. I've been outside for days. And before that, Emma couldn't help asking. Her professional curiosity piqued. His eyes met hers briefly before darting away. Before doesn't matter anymore. Between her quick visits, Emma's thoughts inevitably turned to her own predicament. She'd become a nurse out of love and empathy, inspired by the hospice nurse who had cared for her father with such dignity during his final days with cancer. But her financial situation was dire. Her mother, Linda Wilson, battled a degenerative nerve condition that required expensive treatments not fully covered by insurance. Month by month, Emma's paycheck vanished into prescription fees and specialist bills, leaving her with barely enough for rent and groceries. Late that same night, after making sure the man's vitals had stabilized and his pain had subsided, Emma scraped up a small snack from the hospital vending machine, a packet of crackers and a fruit juice. She paid for them with the last crumpled dollar bills from her purse, mentally calculating how many days until her next paycheck. She hated to admit how close to the edge she was. Her own fridge at home was nearly empty, and payday was still a week away. The homeless man's eyes opened as she returned, weak but conscious. He tried to sit up, wincing from dizziness. Emma gently pressed a hand to his shoulder, urging him not to overexert himself. We think you're severely dehydrated and your blood sugar's dangerously low, she explained, placing the crackers and juice on a small tray. This should help, at least for tonight. His gaze flickered between the meager offering and Emma's tired, yet compassionate face. Something shifted in his expression, recognition, perhaps, or surprise at her gesture. He swallowed, words catching his throat. Thank you. She helped him sip the juice, supporting his head with a gentleness that belied her exhaustion. In that moment, she realized something else about him. Despite his exhaustion, there was a dignity in the way he held himself, a certain careful articulation in his voice that seemed at odds with his ragged attire. His eyes, though clouded with fatigue, held an intelligence and awareness that intrigued her. Still, it wasn't her place to pry. People ended up on the streets for countless reasons: tragedies, mental health crises, unexpected job losses. Emma had learned never to judge, only to care. Don't talk too much, she told him, adjusting his pillow. Get some rest. The 4 fluids should help you feel better by morning. He obeyed, though before she left, his voice emerged in a soft rasp. Not everyone would do this for me. Emma offered a gentle smile, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. Everyone deserves kindness, she said simply, and proper medical care. He closed his eyes as if to shield an emotional response. A nurse from the next bay called for Emma, yanking her back into the tornado of tasks. As she rushed away, she couldn't shake the sense that she was glimpsing only the tip of an iceberg. There was a story beneath this man's silent gratitude, one she might never learn. Hours later, as the ER slowed to a manageable chaos, Emma once again peeked into his cubicle. He was sitting up, nibbling the crackers, looking marginally better. The 4-bag was nearly empty. Color had returned to his face, and his vitals had stabilized. Something about his posture struck her as refined, contradicting his outward appearance. He sat with his back straight, shoulders squared, not the hunched protective stance she often observed in her homeless patients. He caught her gaze and murmured, "You're unusual." "Thank you." Emma's cheeks warmed. "Anyone would do it," she demurred, though they both knew this wasn't true. She'd witnessed enough callousness in healthcare to understand the rarity of genuine compassion. Shaking his head, he disagreed in a hoarse whisper. "No, not just anyone." His eyes held hers with unexpected intensity. "You shared your food when you're clearly struggling yourself." A pulse of confusion and curiosity coursed through her. How had he noticed her own financial strain? Had her worn scrubs or the hesitation when she counted her last dollars given her away? But duty beckoned, and she nodded politely before slipping away to attend to other patients. Despite her best attempts, she couldn't quell the swirl of questions rising in her mind. By the time the early rays of dawn filtered into the ER's wide windows, the storm had finally calmed. The heavy patter of rain on the roof softened, replaced by the routine bustle of nurses switching shifts and new patients drifting in. Emma's eyes stung from fatigue, but she forced herself to keep going for just a little longer. She headed straight to the cubicle where the man had been resting, a sense of responsibility nagging at her. She wanted to schedule lab tests, maybe consult a social worker about follow-up care. If he truly was homeless, he needed a referral for a shelter or transitional service. When she drew back the curtain, the bed was empty. On the cot lay a neatly folded set of hospital scrubs, the ones she'd found for him the previous night. His battered jacket was gone, and so was he. Even the 4 had been carefully removed, the needle disposed of properly in the sharps container. Emma blinked in disbelief. She checked the hallway, the triage station, even the small bathroom off the corridor. Nothing. The other nurses, in the midst of shift change, either shook their heads or offered cynical shrugs. "Surprised," Janelle said, flipping through a clipboard. "Told you he'd vanish." Emma's chest tightened. He wasn't well enough to just walk out. He was still shaky and needed more tests. Janelle gave a pointed sigh. These people always slip away. They never wait for a billing conversation, right? She snorted and hurried off to her next duty. Trying not to let annoyance get the best of her, Emma approached Dr. Sanders. The physician gave a neutral shrug. "If he was stable enough to leave on his own, we can't stop him," he reasoned. "We're not a detention center." Though technically correct, the nonchalance infuriated Emma. She felt protective of the man whose name she didn't even know, remembering how grateful he'd looked. Why would he just slip out without saying goodbye, or at least letting her do a final check? She scoured the immediate grounds after clocking out. Outside the hospital sliding doors, the sidewalk was damp with lingering puddles, but there was no sign of him. Cars zoomed by on the adjacent street, the drab dawn sky hinting at the start of a humid new day. At last, she acknowledged defeat. Her shift was over, and she was running on fumes. She needed to head home, maybe catch a few hours of sleep before returning her next shift. Still, unease gnawed at her as she boarded the bus for her tiny studio apartment, leaning her head against the window. Every bump in the road made her eyelids heavier, but thoughts of the mysterious patient kept her mind spinning. Who was he really? Where would he go now, still in precarious health? The bus pulled up near her complex. Emma stepped off and trudged upstairs, quietly letting herself into her cramped living space. In the faint morning light, she caught sight of her mother's photograph on the worn coffee table. Linda's smile beamed from the frame, taken during a better time before her condition had deteriorated. The sight reminded Emma of the steep bills that awaited her. The overdue rent notice pinned to her refrigerator, the stack of medical invoices on her desk, the prescription that needed refilling by Friday. She sighed, a potent blend of worry for her mother and concern for the missing patient swirling in her chest. Next to the photo lay an unopened envelope from the hospital's HR department. She tore it open, scanning the contents with growing dismay. Budget cuts, reduced overtime hours, potential staff reductions. Weariness overcame her, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't seen the last of the mysterious man. Part of her felt foolish for hoping, for imagining connections where there likely were none. Still, as she collapsed on her bed, she whispered a silent prayer for his safety and for the strength to keep going herself. In the quiet morning stillness, Emma finally surrendered to exhaustion. Dreaming of gentle eyes and unexpected kindness returned. Emma's days blurred into an endless cycle of work and worry. Each time she showed up for her next shift, her colleagues teased her about searching the ER for the missing homeless man. Eventually, she stopped asking around. It was clear he was long gone, yet in odd, quiet moments, she found herself glancing at the entrance, half expecting him to reappear. Outside of work, her personal situation teetered toward crisis. Between rent, groceries, and her mother's escalating medical bills, Emma's paycheck vanished quickly. She'd taken to keeping a detailed spreadsheet of expenses, color-coded by urgency. Red for must pay now, yellow for can delay a week, and an increasingly small section of green for might afford someday. Linda Wilson, Emma's mother, had been a pillar of strength when Emma decided to pursue nursing. A former elementary school teacher, Linda had instilled in her daughter the values of education and service to others. Now, Linda's degenerative condition confined her mostly to bed in a small assisted living facility that consumed most of her pension. "You shouldn't worry so much about me," Linda insisted during Emma's weekly visit, noticing the dark circles under her daughter's eyes. "I've lived a good life." "Don't talk like that," Emma replied, arranging fresh flowers in a vase beside her mother's bed. "The new treatment is showing promise. Dr. Harrington said your latest tests were encouraging." What Emma didn't mention was the cost of those tests, or that she'd taken on extra shifts, 2, sometimes 3 a week, to afford the experimental therapies Linda needed. She worked doubles on weekends and volunteered for the most difficult assignments that offered shift differentials. An additional blow came 3 weeks after the man's disappearance. During a particularly chaotic night shift following a multi-car accident, Emma made a minor documentation error in a patient chart. She'd been working 16 hours straight and missed recording a medication time by 30 minutes. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a simple correction, but the hospital administration had recently adopted a zero-tolerance policy for medical record mistakes. Anxious about lawsuits and accreditation reviews, their decision was swift: a formal reprimand and a temporary pay cut. The day Emma received the news, she was on a short break in the staff cafeteria, sinking onto a plastic chair as she stared in dismay at the HR memo in her hands. "A 15% reduction for 3 pay periods," she whispered, calculating the impact. That was nearly $2,000, money already earmarked for her mother's physical therapy and the overdue electric bill. A coworker, Nurse Alicia, tentatively patted her shoulder. "I'm sorry, Emma. They're really cracking down. It's so unfair. Everyone makes documentation errors on double shifts." Tears pricked Emma's eyes. This pay cut meant she would barely cover half her mother's monthly medication. She'd have to choose which treatment Linda could skip, a heart-wrenching compromise no daughter should have to make. As if on cue, her phone buzzed. She saw Ryan's name flash on the screen. Dr. Ryan Chambers, her ex-boyfriend of 6 months. Emma hesitated, then answered, bracing herself for whatever he wanted. "Emma," he said, his tone cool but purposeful, "we need to talk. Meet me outside the staff entrance in 10 minutes." She couldn't fathom what possibly warranted a face-to-face meeting. Had he heard about her pay cut? Was he calling to gloat? Sure enough, when she met him by the rear exit, his expression was a mix of smugness and contrived sympathy. Ryan, a surgical resident from a wealthy family, had once dazzled Emma with his intellect and ambition. His confidence had been attractive initially, until she discovered it was actually entitlement masquerading as self-assurance. They'd broken up half a year ago when Emma realized Ryan viewed her nursing career as merely cute and temporary, something she'd eventually give up when they married, so she could focus on supporting his medical career and raising their future children. The final straw came when he dismissed her concerns about her mother's health care as excessive worry and suggested Linda accept her condition with dignity rather than pursuing costly treatments. Now he leaned against his luxury car in the staff parking lot, a Tesla Model S that cost more than Emma would make in 3 years. "How are things?" he asked, feigning concern while scrolling through his phone. Emma folded her arms. "I'm managing." He gave a pitying chuckle. "Heard about your pay cut. This hospital can be rough, especially if you lack certain advantages." He gestured at his car, an understated symbol of privilege. "If your finances are in shambles, I'm willing to help." She eyed him, suspicion mounting. Ryan's brand of help always came with strings attached, strings that would eventually form a noose. "What's the catch?" He shrugged, stepping closer, his cologne, expensive and overpowering, invading her space. "Come back to me, Emma. We were good together. My family has connections. My father's on the hospital board. We could get your mother into better facilities, better specialists. She'd receive top-tier care." Emma's stomach twisted. Once, she might have been swayed by the promise of security for her mom. The temptation flickered briefly. Linda deserved the best treatment possible, but she recalled how Ryan manipulated situations to get his way, how he'd subtly undermined her confidence and independence. She forced a calm tone. "I'm not for sale, Ryan. I'll handle my mom's care on my own." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "On your own? With your pay cut? You're fooling yourself." His voice hardened. "And who do you expect to bail you out? Some random homeless man from the ER?" His words cut deeper than she'd anticipated, reminding her of the stranger who had vanished. How did Ryan even know about that? Had he been monitoring her through hospital gossip? Fury burned at her chest. She turned on her heel, refusing to dignify his taunt with a response. Before she walked away completely, Ryan called after her, voice echoing in the dark parking lot. "You're making a huge mistake, Emma. Pride won't pay the bills." She hurried inside, tears pricking at her eyes, half from anger, half from the hopelessness of her situation. That night, after her shift ended, she had to face her mother's worried questions about finances. Linda, noticing Emma's distress, apologized repeatedly for being a burden. "Mom, stop," Emma insisted, holding her mother's hands. "None of this is your fault. We're a team, remember? We always have been." But in the privacy of her small bedroom, Emma stared at the mounting medical bills scattered over her desk. She felt cornered with no obvious escape. For an instant, her mind flitted to the memory of the mysterious man's gentle eyes, that fleeting sense of calm and gratitude he'd shown her. "Why am I even thinking about him?" she chided herself. "He can't solve my problems." Yet some small, irrational part of her couldn't help but wish that a miracle would come from the same place she'd once offered kindness. A bleak week passed. Emma lived on instant noodles and extra coffee, pushing herself to the brink as she continued picking up additional shifts to fill the gap from her reduced pay. Each day felt heavier than the last. Her mother's condition seemed stable, but the bills piled up like a relentless tide. One chilly morning, Emma woke before dawn, having slept barely 3 hours after her late shift. She pulled on a threadbare sweater and trudged to the apartment's front door to retrieve the mail. The hallway was dimly lit, the overhead fluorescent flickering as usual. A small stack of envelopes lay on the ground, mostly junk mail, a few medical statements. With a weary sigh, she gathered them and closed the door. When she leafed through them at the kitchen table, a plain, nondescript envelope caught her eye. No return address, just her name typed on the front, Emma Wilson. Her brow furrowed. She carefully opened it, heart pounding in quiet apprehension. Inside was a single slip of paper, what looked like a cashier's check for $50,000. A typed note accompanied it. For your mother's care. Thank you for your kindness. A friend. Emma's gasp broke the early morning silence. She stared at the check, her brain scrambling to process what she was seeing. $50,000. That was more than she made in a year. Her heart hammered as she flipped the paper over, looking for any sign of forgery or a catch. It bore all the hallmarks of a legitimate cashier's check drawn from a reputable bank. She read the note a second, then a third time. A friend. Who on earth could afford such generosity? Ryan's arrogance flashed through her mind, but the typed words didn't resemble his style at all. He would have gloated or demanded a personal meeting, and there was no reason for the hospital to give her such a sum out of nowhere. Trembling, she called the bank's helpline. After navigating an automated system and waiting on hold for what felt like eternity, a representative confirmed that the check was indeed real and valid. The account it drew from had sufficient funds, and the check had been properly processed. Emma's breath left her in a rush, and tears gathered in her eyes. She thought about her mother, the mounting bills, and the sense of desperation that had weighed on her for months. Suddenly, an impossible weight had been lifted if she dared to accept it. She sat stunned for several minutes, waves of gratitude and suspicion mingling. Could this be from that mysterious man? It seemed absurd, yet her mind couldn't help but recall his smooth hands, his oddly dignified bearing. Thank you for your kindness. The words echoed the same gratitude he'd shown in the ER. A swirl of emotions engulfed her. Relief, joy, weariness, and a nagging sense that accepting such a gift might somehow compromise her independence. Yet the thought of her mother receiving the treatment she desperately needed overrode any hesitation. She phoned Nurse Alicia to share the surreal news. After swearing her friend to secrecy, Emma described the mysterious check. "Oh my God," Alicia squealed, her voice so loud Emma had to hold the phone away from her ear. "This is incredible. Are you going to deposit it?" "I think so," Emma replied, still staring at the check. "I mean Mom's treatment. Of course you should deposit it." Alicia's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "This is fate, Emma. That man you helped must have been someone with major resources. It's like in those stories where a disguised millionaire tests people's compassion." Emma laughed at the outlandish idea, but part of her heart couldn't dismiss it. Or it could be a secret benefactor from the hospital's charity wing, she reasoned, though even as she spoke, she knew the hospital would never just slip a check under her door. Either way, Alicia continued, "This is the universe paying you back for all your kindness. You deserve this, Emma." Later that day, after depositing the check at her local bank branch, where the teller's eyes widened noticeably, Emma returned to her apartment to find an email from the hospital administrators. It announced their annual charitable fundraiser scheduled for the following week, a lavish event to raise money for improved facilities and patient welfare. Staff were invited, though usually few nurses attended given the steep ticket cost of $250 per person. Emma had no intention of going. She lacked both the time and the formal attire, and despite the windfall, she wasn't about to spend money on such frivolities. But that afternoon, as she was preparing for her shift, the hospital board secretary approached her with a personal invitation, courtesy of an anonymous sponsor covering her entrance fee and more. "Ms. Wilson," said the secretary, a prim woman named Diane who rarely interacted with nursing staff, "I've been instructed to personally ensure you receive this." She handed Emma an embossed envelope containing not just an invitation to the gala, but a gift certificate to a high-end boutique for appropriate attire, and a note indicating a car service would be arranged for her transportation. Shock reverberated through her. She recalled the typed note in the envelope. "Thank you for your kindness." A friend. Could it be the same person? Her thoughts whirled. She yearned for answers about the $50,000 windfall. Perhaps attending the gala would shed light on who had stepped into her life so dramatically. Emma stared at the glittering invitation, the check's deposit receipt burning a hole in her purse, and felt something she hadn't experienced in ages. Genuine hope mixed with intense curiosity. The night of the fundraiser arrived more quickly than Emma could have imagined. A sense of anxious excitement prickled at her nerves as she pulled on a simple but elegant emerald green gown, purchased with a gift certificate after much internal debate. The silky fabric draped gracefully, complementing her auburn hair, which she'd styled in loose waves rather than her usual practical ponytail. She had never attended anything quite so fancy. A black-tie event at the luxurious Westbridge Grand Hotel, complete with towering fountains and red-carpeted entrances. When Emma stepped out of the sleek black car that had arrived punctually at her apartment building, she paused to take in the hotel's facade. Richly lit arches and an ornate glass canopy sparkling under the bright city lights. "What am I even doing here?" she wondered, clutching her small borrowed clutch purse tight. She swallowed her nerves and followed the line of elegant doctors, board members, and philanthropic donors streaming inside. In the lobby, orchestral music played softly from a string quartet positioned near a grand staircase. A reception table offered name badges with gold lettering. Emma Wilson, RN, read the tidy lettering on her tag. She accepted it with a stiff smile, her heart pounding at the thought of possibly encountering the mysterious friend who had sent that life-changing check. Servers in crisp uniforms meandered through the crowd with silver trays of champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Emma caught glimpses of hospital bigwigs she recognized, Dr. Sanders conversing with the CFO and the chief of surgery laughing with donors. And then she saw Ryan, leaning against a marble pillar, scanning the crowd with predatory confidence. He glanced her way, eyebrows shooting up in surprise at her transformed appearance. His gaze traveled slowly from her face to her dress and back again, a mixture of appreciation and calculation in his eyes. She quickly looked away, not wanting another confrontation to spoil the evening. A hush descended when the evening's host, an impeccably dressed board member, took the stage at the front of the grand ballroom. "Welcome, everyone, to our annual Westbridge General Charity Gala," he boomed into the microphone. Applause rippled through the crowd. "Tonight, we celebrate those who go above and beyond in supporting our hospital's mission, caring for all, regardless of financial status." Emma found a seat at a round table half filled with doctors and donors, exchanging polite nods. Between the speeches and presentations, she scanned the room for any sign of that ragged stranger. If he truly is behind the check, would he show up like this? The notion seemed improbable, yet she couldn't help searching every face. Midway through the program, after the obligatory slideshow of hospital achievements and tearful testimonials from grateful patients, an unexpected announcement came. The board member cleared his throat. "We have a special guest with us tonight, a philanthropist who's made a significant private donation to support patient bills, specifically for those with dire financial challenges. It is my honor to introduce our generous benefactor, Mr. Alexander Carter." Polite applause fluttered through the ballroom. Emma nearly dropped her fork. Alexander Carter. That name rang a bell. She'd seen it recently in a business magazine at her dentist's office. Something about tech innovation and sustainable energy investments. The hush grew deeper as the man took the stage. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a sleek black tuxedo that complemented his composed demeanor. His hair was neatly styled, his posture confident yet somehow humble. Emma's pulse hammered. Something about his face was strikingly familiar. The shape of his jaw, the warmth in his brown eyes. His voice, though resonant and poised, carried a hint of that same quiet tone she remembered from the hospital. He began to speak, thanking the hospital for allowing him the chance to support charitable cases. Then he paused, scanning the crowd. When his gaze locked onto Emma's, her heart twisted. A gentle recognition flickered in his expression. She inhaled sharply, mind spinning. "It can't be." Alexander's voice trembled slightly. "I'd like to share a personal story. Some months ago, I experienced a deep crisis, both health-wise and emotionally. I'd lost faith in people's sincerity, so I disguised myself to see how strangers might treat me if I had nothing to offer. And I ended up in the ER at Westbridge General on a stormy night." A visible ripple passed through the audience, low whispers of confusion and intrigue. Emma's eyes widened. He's admitting he was that man. Alexander's gaze remained on her, unwavering. During that night, I encountered a nurse. She did not look at me with judgment or pity. She simply treated me as though my life mattered. When I recovered enough to slip away, I couldn't forget her compassion. It restored my faith that genuine kindness exists. The room fell into hushed awe. Ryan, who stood across the room, looked dumbfounded, eyes darting between Alexander on stage and Emma, who sat frozen in her seat. The donation I made to the hospital, Alexander continued, voice thick with emotion, was in large part to ensure that nurse could continue her mission without the burdens that plague so many underpaid healthcare workers. She gave me a gift that night, a renewed belief in humanity, and I wanted to return that favor. He lifted the microphone slightly, swallowing hard as though steadying himself. I never knew if I'd see her again, but I'm here now to publicly thank Emma Wilson, the nurse who went out of her way to help a man she believed was homeless and broke. A wave of gasps and applause erupted. All eyes pivoted to Emma. She felt every nerve in her body firing at once. Shock, embarrassment, and a fierce surge of gratitude. Slowly, she rose from her chair, hardly aware of the cameras flashing or the thunderous clapping around her. Alexander stepped down from the stage, moving through the crowd with purpose but without haste. Despite her swirling emotions, Emma found herself walking forward, meeting him halfway across the ballroom floor. He reached out, gently took her hand, and leaned in to speak over the noise. "I never got to thank you properly," he murmured, his voice low and sincere. Emma's throat closed up. She stared at this man, no longer in rags, but the same eyes, the same quiet dignity. She recalled how fragile he'd seemed in the ER cubicle, how she'd bandaged his wound, shared her last few dollars on a vending machine snack. She could hardly believe the transformation, yet here he was, gazing at her with genuine warmth amidst a sea of astonished onlookers. And though confusion whirled in her mind, a sense of profound relief and wonder spread through her chest. The universe, it seemed, sometimes did acknowledge acts of kindness. Within moments, the gala's planned schedule unraveled into a swirl of excited chatter and camera flashes as Alexander guided Emma toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. Hospital administrators approached, shaking his hand and offering thanks. He responded graciously, but his attention clearly rested on the stunned nurse at his side. She managed to whisper, mind still reeling, "Alexander Carter, you're the—" He gave a small nod, looking almost apologetic. I had to test the sincerity of those around me. "It's complicated." Emma could hardly speak. I don't understand. You're a millionaire, but that night, I was in the midst of my own crisis," Alexander explained, voice tight with emotion. "I lost my sister, Elaine, to a rare autoimmune condition about a year ago. She was my only family after our parents passed." His eyes clouded with grief. "The circumstances made me question everyone's motives, my so-called friends, business partners, even the medical professionals who treated her." He paused, gathering himself. "Some seemed more interested in my foundation's donations than in Elaine's comfort. After she died, I couldn't bear the phoniness anymore. I stepped away from my responsibilities, disguised myself, and wandered for weeks, wanting to see if genuine kindness still existed or if people only cared about my money." Emma remembered the softness of his hands and the dignity in his posture. It all clicked into place. He wasn't a typical homeless individual. He was a man grappling with heartbreak, hidden beneath tattered clothes. She swallowed, tears threatening to blur her vision. "You left so suddenly. I worried about you." His gaze warmed. "I didn't mean to vanish. I panicked. I realized how easily you saw my vulnerability, and I wasn't ready to face that. But I never forgot what you did, especially when I learned about your financial struggles, your mother's illness." As the crowd pressed in, wanting to speak with Alexander, he placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "Let's step outside for a moment. We need real privacy." They slipped into a side hallway that led to the hotel's terrace. Cool night air greeted them, and the city lights twinkled below like earthbound stars. Emma inhaled deeply, her heart pounding. It felt surreal to stand here alone with a man she'd once offered help to in a cramped hospital cubicle. At first, they simply stared at each other, the weight of their improbable connection hanging between them. Then Alexander broke the silence. "I deposited that check for you, hoping you'd accept it as gratitude. When the hospital's fundraiser approached, I saw the chance to come forward publicly." He hesitated, then added, "But there's more I want to offer you, Emma." Her cheeks flushed. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. You've changed my life and my mother's." He stepped closer, gently taking her hands. "Your compassion changed mine." They talked in hushed tones for what felt like hours, but must have been only minutes. Emma recounted the struggles of working double shifts, the heartbreak of nearly losing her mother to an incurable disease, and her frustration with the harsh realities of hospital bureaucracy, how patients were sometimes viewed as billing codes rather than human beings. Alexander listened intently, occasionally pressing her hand, his eyes reflecting empathy rather than pity. He shared more about his sister Elaine, how vibrant she'd been before her illness, how she'd founded a small arts program for underprivileged children, how her hospital room had been filled with their crayon drawings until the end. After she died, he explained, "I couldn't bear the condolence card from people who barely knew her but suddenly wanted to be associated with my family's foundation." The final straw was overhearing my CFO discussing potential tax benefits from Elaine's memorial fund before she was even buried. Emma nodded, understanding his disillusionment. "That's why you disappeared. I needed to see humanity without the filter of wealth," he confirmed. "What I found was mostly indifference, occasionally cruelty, until I met you." A short silence fell, heavy with unspoken emotions. The muffled sounds of the gala drifted through the glass doors. Emma's heart thrummed with an intensity that surprised her. She felt an inexplicable closeness to Alexander, as though they'd shared a bond far beyond a nurse-patient dynamic. Then, with the city lights illuminating his profile, Alexander reached into his tuxedo pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Emma," he said softly, voice trembling, "my gratitude to you goes beyond mere money. Since that night, every day has been shaped by the memory of your kindness. Meeting you shattered my cynicism. You gave me hope." He took a deep breath. "I realize this might seem sudden, but life is too short to let meaningful connections slip away." He opened the box, revealing a stunning but tasteful diamond ring that caught the reflected glow of distant street lamps. "Will you let me share my life with you? Will you marry me?" Emma's breath caught in her throat. Tears welled in her eyes, and for an instant, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the soft music from the ballroom. Part of her mind screamed that this was absurdly fast. They'd only truly spent one night in each other's orbit, followed by this extraordinary evening. But another part recalled the profound connection she'd felt with him, how she had risked her meager resources for him without hesitation, how deeply he had impacted her life in return. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "Alexander, I'm overwhelmed. This is so sudden. I barely know you, and yet." He stood there, gaze unwavering but not demanding. "I know. I don't want you to feel pressured. I only want you to know the depth of my feelings. If your answer is no, I'll respect that, but I had to tell you." Emotion coursed through Emma. She thought of her mother, now receiving the best care possible, of her own battered finances, salvaged by his gift, of the sincerity in his eyes when he admitted his heartbreak. A swirl of reason and emotion tangled in her mind. Drawing a shaky breath, she gently covered the ring with her hand, not rejecting it, but not quite placing it on her finger either. Can I have time to think?" A look of deep relief crossed Alexander's face, as if fearing outright refusal. "Of course. Take all the time you need. My feelings won't change." They stood there for a moment, hands entwined, the ring glimmering in the space between them. Emma's heart was torn between caution and an undeniable pull toward the man who had so drastically entered her life. Emma returned home from the gala that night in a daze, her mind too abuzz for sleep. She placed the velvet box carefully in a drawer next to the precious cashier's check that had rescued her family from financial ruin. For the next few days, she navigated a surreal limbo, fulfilling her nursing duties at the hospital while also spending her off hours meeting Alexander in quieter, more personal settings away from prying eyes. Their conversations grew increasingly intimate. Alexander shared stories of his childhood in Boston, his family's philanthropic legacy dating back 3 generations, and how wealth had become both a blessing and a barrier in his relationships. Emma talked about her father's passing when she was young, her decision to pursue nursing after witnessing his hospice care, and the heartbreak of watching her mother's health deteriorate without adequate funds. People at the hospital buzzed with rumors. Word traveled fast. Some staff gossiped that Emma was only in it for the money, while others, remembering her years of generosity toward patients, championed the love story with excitement. Ryan avoided Emma altogether, humiliated by Alexander's presence and overshadowed by a far more sincere show of support. Eventually, Emma introduced Alexander to Linda Wilson. Seeing him in the modest living room of her mother's assisted living apartment was both jarring and heartwarming. The elegant millionaire removing his expensive shoes at the door, humbly greeting Emma's ailing mother with a bouquet of bright wildflowers. Linda, propped up on the couch with pillows, beamed at him. "You're the one who saved us from those bills," she said, tears in her eyes. Alexander simply took Linda's hand. "Your daughter saved me first, in ways I can never fully repay." Emma watched as Linda peppered him with questions about his life, his favorite books, whether he preferred coffee or tea, occasionally admonishing him to sit down and stop hovering like a nervous bird. A soft warmth spread through Emma's chest as she observed his genuine patience and interest in her mother's stories. Over time, Emma couldn't ignore how deeply she and Alexander connected. Though they came from vastly different worlds, they shared a passion for caring about those in need. Alexander even proposed establishing a charitable organization that would provide free or subsidized treatment for homeless patients, an initiative inspired by Emma's unwavering compassion that fateful night. One sunny afternoon, as they strolled through a local park, Alexander paused by a rose garden in full bloom. He turned to Emma, the sunlight catching the gentle flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I asked you a question that night about whether you'd marry me," he said quietly. "I don't want to pressure you, but I need to know if there's hope." A tender smile curved Emma's lips. She recalled the swirl of emotions that had overwhelmed her at the gala. Now, after spending time with him, truly getting to know his heart, she felt a steady certainty blossoming in her chest. She retrieved the small velvet box from her purse and opened it. The ring sparkled, reflecting the warm glow of the afternoon sun. "I've thought so much about this," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes again. "Part of me was afraid of what people would think, or that our differences were too great. But I don't care anymore. I love who you are, Alexander, not what you have." He exhaled a breath he'd been holding, relief washing over his face. "Emma," she nodded, slipping the ring onto her finger. "Yes, I'll marry you." Laughter and tears mingled as Alexander swept her into a hug, the rose garden's sweet fragrance enveloping them. In that moment, any last traces of doubt dissolved. Shortly thereafter, they announced their engagement. Together, they founded the Wilson Carter Foundation, dedicated to providing financial assistance to patients facing hardship, mirroring the life-changing generosity Emma and her mother had received. At the hospital, Emma's coworkers eventually rallied around her, many moved by her sincerity and the couple's philanthropic vision. On a crisp autumn evening exactly 1 year after their fateful first meeting, Emma and Alexander wed in a small but joyful ceremony. Linda, smiling brighter than she had in years, walked Emma down the aisle with the aid of a sturdy cane, a moment doctors had once thought impossible before her new treatments. Only a handful of close friends and family gathered under an arbor draped in flowers as they exchanged vows. Emma wore a simple ivory gown, Alexander a classic suit with a single wildflower boutonniere. As a thunderstorm gathered on the horizon, a poetic echo of their first meeting, they promised to cherish each other through whatever storms life might bring. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the first raindrops began to fall, glistening like diamonds on the rose petals scattered at their feet. Emma felt the resonance of every challenge and every act of kindness that had led them here, bound together by compassion, renewed faith, and an unwavering belief in the power of love. In the years that followed, the Wilson Carter Foundation would go on to help thousands of patients access care they couldn't otherwise afford. And on stormy nights, when rain hammered against their bedroom window, Emma and Alexander would hold each other close, remembering how a single act of kindness in a busy emergency room had changed both their lives forever.